It looks like we've got people filtering in now. We had quite a few RSVPs on the list, so I'm going to give a few minutes for people to get logged in and situated. All right. I'm going to give it just another minute before we get going. In the meantime, thank you to everyone who's already logged in. Welcome to the final event of the Archivist Roundtable's New York Archives Week issue launch for the Metropolitan Archivist. We're gonna hold off for just a second while people get logged in to the session, and we'll get rolling in just a sec. Thanks for your patience. Okay, I think we're safe to get going. As I was saying before, welcome to the final event of the Archivist Roundtable's New York Archives Week. New York Archives Week is a week-long celebration we hold every year that celebrates the accomplishments of archivists and allied professionals who use archives and support archives in their preservation. This year, we're very excited to be launching the Metropolitan Archivist, which is our publication of some time. We've relaunched it as a digital quarterly with lots of articles, digital exhibitions, multimedia interviews, and more. So we're excited to have several of our authors joining us today on the panel. And before we get going, we'll just describe a little bit of what we were thinking of when we decided to organize this first issue, which is entitled Invisible City. So forgive me if I'm a little formal here. With the opening of the academic year and the fall season of Archivist Roundtable's programming, things look strikingly different than they have in the past. The pandemic has halted our ability to gather together and socialize. The landscape for cultural heritage institutions and universities is unrecognizable from what it was only months ago. The city itself has been emptied out in some sectors and spilled into the parks and streets in others. Our lives have been radically transformed. Despite the disruption and social isolation, the pandemic has had the effect of revealing and foregrounding aspects of everyday existence that for too long have failed to register in the mainstream consciousness. In the wake of mounting personal and communal losses triggered by COVID-19 and the groundswell of public demonstrations over the loss of Black lives at the hands of police, we can no longer ignore the inequities that disproportionately burden communities of color or be silent to the violence they have endured. Archivists and special collections librarians know firsthand gaps and silences that profoundly shape the historical record and the narratives it supports. Community-based archives have long provided a vital counterpoint and safe haven for records of groups that society has undervalued and history has overlooked. Scholars and archivists of color who have attempted to raise awareness about structural racism made manifest in these lapses have often gone unheard. The pandemic and its effects have exacerbated the precarity of these smaller organizations, even as the shift of in-person activities to virtual has underscored the resource divide that exists between institutions able to support digital collections and virtual reference and those that cannot. So with all of these things in mind, my co-editor, Emily Androsini, who's joined us today, and I posed this question to our members and to the archives community in New York at large. When we think of the historical footprint of New York City, what image comes to mind now and into the future? What stories will records created during this pandemic tell? Of whom and for whom will they be? And I think that each of our authors has really eloquently addressed this question from a number of vantage points, with really deep dives into a number of areas of New York's history that have really lacked coverage in the past. So it's very exciting to bring these stories forward and hear from these authors today. And with that, we're going to pass it off to the authors. Emily, can you introduce our first speaker today?
Happy to. Thank you, Amy. Our first speaker this evening is Diane Buno. I'm just going to read her bio now. For her digital exhibit in plain sight, Diane Buno explores hidden jazz collections in New York's outer boroughs and held at institutions and private collections throughout New York and New Jersey. Revealed through oral histories, photographs, and ephemera made accessible in digital collections, the exhibit draws our focus away from the spotlight to see jazz through the often overlooked lens of community. Diane, tell us how this exhibit came together and what drew you to some of the materials.
Hello. Yes, so just briefly, the idea for the digital exhibit actually came out of sort of the circumstances of the pandemic. Over the summer, it became sort of abundantly clear to everybody, because of the pandemic, resources are going to be sort of kind of stretched maybe, in our individual institutions. And we're all kind of going through this together. So during one of the art community meetings, I sort of mentioned, like, wouldn't it be great if we all kind of got together and did something collaborative to kind of promote our collections, or maybe apply for a grant, or pull our skills together. And someone suggested doing a digital exhibit of our jazz collections. So I thought that would be, a wonderful idea for us to highlight sort of the institutions in our area and the great work that these institutions and staff members and archivists are doing. And I should also mention that I started my new position here at the Institute of Jazz Studies at Rutgers, like a few weeks before the pandemic hit and everything closed. And I moved here from Philadelphia. So I wasn't familiar with, I didn't get a chance to get to know you guys, to know the institutions in the area. So this was kind of a good way to, I don't want to say take advantage of the pandemic, that's a terrible expression, but take advantage of the situation. It was a great way to collaborate with folks. So that being said, the digital exhibit, like I mentioned, highlights jazz collections and institutions and people in communities that don't always, get their due, or that people don't broadly know about. So when Art put out the request, the proposal for the digital exhibit, I should mention that a bunch of institutions got back to me, and there are so many jazz collections in the area. It's quite remarkable. And these are just a handful of them. There are about 7 of them. So in the first, we're dividing the digital exhibit into 2 publications. And this first publication that comes out tonight, we're going to highlight the jazz collections in the New York City outer boroughs. So mostly Queens and Brooklyn. So Weeksville Heritage Society collections, the Yeville Institute for Jewish Research, and Queens Public Library. And to just tell you briefly about what's in that exhibit, without giving too much away, you should go visit it. That first exhibit kind of highlights kind of the community-based work that archivists are doing, specifically like at Weeksville, their oral history projects. So their collections are sort of co-authored with the community. And I thought like that was really important to highlight. We're also highlighting sort of Jewish Americans and Jewish immigrants and their sort of role in jazz through the Yeville Institute of Jewish Research. And there's also a beautiful map of a neighborhood in Queens where all the jazz greats lived. And that's from Queens Public Library. So that's sort of in the first installment of the exhibit. In the second installment of the exhibit, we're featuring really wonderful collections from the Jazz Loft, which if you guys haven't heard of it, you should go there immediately and check them out. They're a great organization. They're based in Stony Brook. They have wonderful museum collections, archival collections. They also do, I believe, concert programs and just programming and education as well. So they're a great organization. The Whitney Museum, which needs no introduction, but we're highlighting some of the jazz performances and series there. The Institute of Jazz Studies, which is where I work. We're highlighting some of the collections from the Marshall Stearns and the Count Basie collection. And of course, and last but not least, the Al Hirschfeld Foundation. Al Hirschfeld was a caricaturist that drew many images of jazz musicians. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
And so I've actually, I've only included the images from the part 1 of Diane's exhibition. So stay tuned for part 2, which is coming quite soon.
Hello?
You're unmuted.
I'm unmuted. Something popped up as I was hitting enter, so I couldn't catch it. Okay, so now, thank you so much, Diane. That was really great. It was great overview. Sorry. While I'd love to delve more deeply into what Diane has just shared, we're going to continue with our arrangement and introduce our additional panelists. So now up next we have Juana Suarez. Juana's article explores the archival practices of Los Herederos, collective musicians and intermedia artists as a means of documenting and sustaining traditional music cultures and their cross-pollinations in the ethnically diverse neighborhood of Jackson Heights in Queens, and how these practices were adapted in real time during the pandemic to meet the material needs of vulnerable people in these communities. Juana, welcome. I'm excited to hear your overview.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, colleagues, for being here today. And the people that we are not seeing, thank you for taking time in this rainy evening to join us. So yes, my entry is about the collective that you mentioned, Los Herederos. And Los Herederos, to say so, over the years have been compiling a very spontaneous archive that has been gaining shape in the last 5 years through the creation of the actual organization, some of their own time and some support from institutions like NYU and the program that I direct, the Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program. So it is not really an archive with an office, like with a place, with the most of the materials are in the houses of the people that have been compiling this material. Databases have been created, and they do a lot of social action and a lot of visibility and a lot of musical actions, mostly in the area of Queens. And what I highlight in this entry for the Metropolitan is that during the pandemic, because most of the members of the group live in the Queens area, particularly in the neighborhoods of Elmhurst, Corona, and Jackson Heights, that, as we know, were severely battled by the high peak of the pandemic. And that's really where most essential workers live. So I start by questioning what is it that we call essential workers and how the pandemic made them visible, but how this project for a while halted what they usually do for an archive and for musical compiling to use their infrastructure and support the community. So and I think that we also have to keep in mind that the pandemic intersects with a moment in which there is a lot of useless criminalization of immigrants. This government, this presidential administration has been extremely tough on immigrants and tends to portray a very homogeneous image of immigrants. And so obviously not everybody that lives in Queens is an illegal immigrant. There's also, and I'm very glad that Diane just mentioned that, is a community with a lot of history, with a history of settlement in New York, with a history of migration. But most of people that are members of Los Herederos have also been immigrants that have come to the States in many cases in an attempt to pursue an artistic career, and in order to survive, they have had essential workers, so they know the idea of being an essential worker from their own empirical background. And because many of them have worked in the past with Cabrini Immigration Services, which are some offices here by Henry Street Settlement, they joined forces with Cabrini to extend the food pantry to Queens, to some families that were not getting necessary goodies, and use the archival infrastructure that they have, the ability to create the census, the ability to map out the population, and a Sony Cycle, which is a bicycle that they have equipped with 2 DJ turntables to promote services that Cabrini compiled in different languages. So there was like gluing of posters or flyers in public spaces so that people will know these are phone numbers that you can reach out if you need information about COVID. These are some phone numbers that you can use if you need food. And of course, you will imagine that when you are working with vulnerable populations, you need to build trust. So providing a phone number is a way to tell people, reach out to us and we will give you the information, because of course, a lot of people that live in Queens, and there are either refugees, there are either undocumented, are worried about falling for a trap of immigration and the experience becoming a deportation nightmare. So during the high peak of the pandemic, Los Herederos collaborated with this kind of action. I think that providing information at that very moment was absolutely important, because even those of us that have more access to resources were very confused about what is this pandemic about? How do we get the virus? How does it go from one person to another person? And I think that those of us that understand a minimum amount of science know that a vaccine is not going to be ready in a week, that anything that is medical or scientific has like a long trying period. So little by little, they have come back to their work, and we plan to resume working with them. Los Herederos have worked with NYU MIAP. We had Daniel Calle assessing one collection. We had Mary Smith writing a report about them. They were also our partners last year at Queen's Library as DJs for Home Movie Day. And we have also, from some work that I have been doing through NYU MIAP Apex, they had done some screenings at Terraza 7, which is a bar in Elmhurst that is like a meeting point, because none of these people are really archivists, but I would say they are, because they had this will to document culture and to document the migrant experience, and to document the migrant experience when it's going through difficult moments and also through good times. So Terraza 7 is also like a little hub where people meet, and many of these people are photographers, people that have a lot of knowledge about sound, about music, but they combine regular jobs with their inclination to document the community. And I think that their job has to be continued. Of course, they were very cautious on documenting these activities that they were doing with Cabrini, but always protecting the identity and the safety of those who were receiving the food. I think that one of the most interesting projects that has some future, but that also has a lot of geopolitical, a lot of geolocation vulnerability, is that they map out streets that they didn't know in the area of Queens. And you could do some kind of taxonomy or archival description of what their houses and the urban settlings are and how they connect to their backgrounds. But of course, we will need safer times in immigration to be able to do that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juana. It's really incredible.
I see that Naomi Stern, who is one of the co-founders of Los Herederos, wrote the website in the chat for everybody.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I think it's for all panelists. I'll put it for everyone.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Okay, so you want me to explain what this is, Emily, for a second, or how?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so this is like a sample of the flyers that were designed and display in different streets and corners in Queens, Jackson Heights, Corona, and Elmhurst. And then it's written in Spanish, and it's inviting people to the food pantry, and is providing some information, some contact information on how to get information. And so the food was most of the times delivered to the houses. They took Ubers and taxis. The Sony Cycle is too small to do this. Next. During the pandemic, there was a fundraiser, and of course, observing social distancing. They broadcasted using the Sony Cycle. So you can see the bicycle here. You have a frontal view of the DJ turntables, and then the Mauricio Bayona, who is actually, like I would say, the very first seat, because he used to show up in places with his camera to document things, and he has like this archivist spirit to keep the things. And I think that Mauricio is now learning that he has to label the things, that he has to think about release, etc. And he is sharing that knowledge with everybody that comes to be a part of Los Herederos. And so this was the patio of the house in Queens from where they were broadcasting. This was a fundraising. There was music and virtual dancing. And this is a better view of the bicycle. This picture is from fall 2019. This is in Diversity Plaza. So that's why you see people with no mask. We were not aware of what was coming. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juana. Okay, up next we have Toby Sanchez. In her article, Toby meditates on archival silences regarding the women of the East Midwood Jewish Center in the Midwood neighborhood of Flatbush, formed in the decades following successive influxes of Jewish immigrants from Europe and open to congregants of diverse backgrounds. The women's group known as Sisterhood fostered community and traditional memory as the congregation became assimilated to the American landscape, but were themselves rarely recognized for their service. Toby has investigated this and will now impart her knowledge on us. Toby, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for this, for making me think about this interesting question. Okay, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, some background. Okay, East Midwood Jewish Center is a 96-year-old congregation. It's still going strong. And it was started in 1924 by a group of new residents. They were pretty well established young businessmen and with their wives, and it was a neighborhood. It was actually a new neighborhood, and about 5 miles south of Prospect Park, and it was promoted by the real estate world as New Brooklyn. Jews had moved from the Lower East Side to Williamsburg to Crown Heights, and this was the new place to move to. But there were a lot of vacant lots. There were no stores, so it was really very isolated. So two gentlemen independently went door to door and rang doorbells, and they asked people, "Are you Jewish? If so, okay. Would you like a place to go for your services? And wouldn't you like a place where your sons and daughters can meet similar people and get married and preserve the Jewish community?" And so they said yes. And so very quickly, this group of people was able to find enough members, incorporate, raise money, buy land, get a mortgage, and they were off and running. They started in 24. They started construction in 1925. They hired a top-notch architect. They had a fight with him, and then they got another architect, and together they produced a magnificent building. And so then they finished the building 1929. And the building cost $1 million, and of course there was a large mortgage, but they had done a terrific job in fundraising during these 5 years. Who did the fundraising? The wives of the members. The Sisterhood, that's such a common name for the women's organization in the synagogue, raised many thousands of dollars. It was $30,000 in 2 years, but that's the equivalent of $400,000 today. There they are. You can see the picture, the ladies with their hats. That page appeared in the 1929 Journal of Dedication. But these ladies did more than wear hats and go to lunch. They were busy all the time. They did fundraising every day of the week for the first few years. They had a luncheon, they had a theater party, they had a holiday party, whatever, they had a raffle, they had speakers, whatever it was, they were at work. So in 1929, they had 5 pages in the special journal, and they were lauded to the skies. But as years went on, and East Midwood grew and grew and grew, and eventually had 1,500 members, Sisterhood was pretty much forgotten. They kept on working and raising all kinds of money. They raised millions during World War II, selling bonds, and they raised thousands of dollars for East Midwood, which they turned over every year. But that wasn't all. They also raised lots of money for different Jewish charities. They worked very hard for the Red Cross during the war, and they did all sorts of things. But as time went on, they got less and less recognition. There was the 25th anniversary journal just gave them a page with a picture of the officers, but no names. The 1974 journal gave them only half a page, and here's 1974. Those are the leaders of sisterhood, and then the bottom, these are the ladies that created a Braille group. These ladies learned Braille, and they translated 4,000 books into Braille, the dots, etc. This was long before cassettes and phones where you could just listen to anything. A blind person really had to learn Braille, otherwise they would be totally cut off from books and learning. So these ladies learned Braille and did 4,000 books. And of course, we have letters of commendation from the Library of Congress and all the blind organizations. But their names were not even mentioned in the journal. This is what struck me. They just became the invisible workers, the little busy bees, but they didn't deserve their names. So when I saw this, and then I saw the competition to write an article, I said, oh, obviously it's the women that are invisible. And of course, I can document that because I've just finished putting together the archives of East Midwood, and I have 84 boxes, but only 3 of them deal with sisterhood. The point being that sisterhood's work was not preserved. Maybe the ladies preserved it, I don't know, but very little of their records, what did I find in the files. I'm hoping that some of them have saved things. So that I realized that these women worked and worked, and they did a very important thing. And this is not just a Jewish phenomenon, although it does exist in every synagogue. These ladies' organizations exist in every church, everywhere in the United States. And this is not just important for fundraising. These organizations helped women learn how to organize, put on events, lead, be creative, speak up, learn to speak up. That's what they learned. And that's happened and women's organizations all over the country are now being recognized by historians as very important part of the evolution of American society. In my own family, I can talk about this. My grandmother was an immigrant. She spoke English. She could read English, but she could not spell properly, and she did make mistakes in English. In the 20s, about 1925, my grandfather abandoned the family. My grandmother, of course, had to go to work. Her children left school to help with the family. But what was she going to do? She tried selling coal. She tried doing marriage matches. You don't make much money that way. Somebody said to her, "Oh, Mrs. Friedman, you've been such a good fundraiser with sisterhood. Here's a job. There's a magazine that's looking for someone to get advertising." She had it. So then she became a person. She had a business card. She made cold calls. It must have been pretty lonely and pretty hard, but she made money. Now she wasn't an abandoned wife. She was a somebody. And I'm sure this story has been repeated all over the country among women in churches and synagogues. So that's why, more I thought about it, the more I thought that these kinds of organizations are vital to American society. Of course, in the Jewish world, and I'm sure in churches, women work now, and so sisterhoods have fallen by the wayside. They're still there, they're still important, but they don't play the same role as in the past. One thing I recently learned, that our sisterhood raised thousands of pounds of clothing for people in Europe after the war. And they also raised thousands of pounds of food in 1946 because there was a famine in Europe because of all the destruction during the war and a very bad harvest. So a call went out to synagogues in particular, raise collect food, send clothes, send shoes. And our sisterhood, as well as many others, respond to this need. Of course, now it's not as active as it used to be. But one other byproduct of sisterhood is that it created a community. It's not enough to have a building, and people get together, they have the holidays, they'll have a dinner dance. More than that, sisterhood worked hard to make it a community where your whole family belonged. We have a gym, we had a nursery school, we had a pool, everything. It was designed to serve every age from childhood to old age, to be a family. And I can say that East Midwood still operates as a family. When there's a death in a family, people automatically send food, come to visit, do whatever they can. When a new baby is born, people send food. People are sick, they call and they visit. Nobody has to tell them. This is part of the tradition created by sisterhood. Okay.
Thank you so much, Toby. That was really passionately delivered, and it's very, very compelling, and I really appreciate your contribution.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll introduce our next panelist. Coming up, we have Chris Nichols. Unless, am I mistaken? No, that's right. Okay, sorry. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'll let everyone know that Chris's article describes the history of the New York City Police Department surveillance films from 1960 to 1980. The collection at the city's municipal archives, which capture a variety of political groups and activist activities in the civil rights era. The films, which remain dormant for decades, offer glimpses of residents and neighborhoods throughout the boroughs, evoking the texture and tensions of the time. Chris will now deliver his research. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Thank you. So I'm the audiovisual archivist at the New York City Municipal Archives. I've been working there for almost 3 years now. I was lucky enough to digitize the collection of films over the course of 2019. And of course, I found all the images of 2020 to be extremely relevant to the collection that I worked on. Back for this collection, the NYPD started major intelligence operations in the beginning of the 20th century. It was started under a unit called the Italian Squad that was staffed by Italians under Detective Petrosino to combat organized crime from incoming Italian immigrants. That evolved over time into what became known as the Red Squad. That was meant to combat socialist, communist, and anarchist activities in the United States. By the 1950s, it had evolved from a unit into a full-fledged bureau of the NYPD. This was called the Bureau of Special Services and Investigations. It's also had a lot of different names over the last century. I think one of them was the Intelligence Unit. The Bureau of Special Services without investigations was another name for it. But for this time period, I'll just refer to it by its common name, BOSSI. So this collection from 1960 to 1980, we don't have a lot of accompanying documentation that came with this collection of films. Actually, the collection of films was not handed over to us by the NYPD as part of a regular process. The NYPD contacted someone at the municipal archives asking for advice about how to get rid of nitrate film. Excuse me. When the municipal archives employee went to look at the film, they realized what the collection actually was, and then we acquired it. So, hold on a second. So along with the films, we have really just one piece of documentation that gives us any kind of background information as to how the NYPD saw this program, what their intentions were, how they prioritized their resources. And it's an assignments logbook that was kept throughout the 1960s and 70s to give new assignments, to new surveillance assignments. So it's been speculated sometimes that maybe they're missing films from the collection that would have become evidence in a court. If so, they would have left NYPD and gone to the district attorney's office. We don't have a lot of empty. If that were the case, then we would have seen a lot of missing films from the assignment logbook, because the assignment logbook was not an inventory created to allow people to search through the films. It was an ongoing assignment logbook. So the content of the films is mostly the two largest movements that are recorded in the films are the civil rights era protests and then also Vietnam War protests. In addition to that, there's a really, really broad range of topics. They surveyed a lot of foreign dignitaries coming to visit the UN, because the Bureau of Special Services and Investigation also provided security for those foreign dignitaries. I think there was a lot of concern about, of course, John F. Kennedy was killed in public, Robert F. Kennedy was killed, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed all throughout the 1960s. There was a lot of concern about whether New York City would be able to host the United Nations, or if possibly it would need to be moved from a city that was just deemed too dangerous for foreign dignitaries. But so we have films in that collection of Malcolm X at protests in Harlem. We have protests about police brutality, about integrating the school system in New York, about segregation in labor and hiring practices. And there were a lot of images from this year that made me obviously think of that collection that I digitized over 2019. And one thing that I'm hoping that is also in the title, one thing that I'm hoping to do by promoting the collection is to get the communities that were recorded by the NYPD to reclaim a sense of ownership over these recordings. A lot of these films, I think you'll see in some of the pictures. Yeah, actually, could we start seeing some of the pictures? Yeah, so a lot of these films, oh, I should give a little bit more background, I'm sorry. So these films were not recorded by uniformed police officers. These were recorded, these were all 16 millimeter films, silent, black and white, 3 minutes long. They were recorded on very small cameras. The police officers were dressed just in normal clothes. So none of these people knew that the person holding the camera was a police officer. As far as they knew, it was just a random bystander who happened to be walking by an NAACP protest that day and recorded them with a camera. There are still images that also accompany these films. There's 1,450 16 millimeter surveillance films. There are over 250,000 still images from this time period. This image is from, these images are all from a protest against the construction of Rochdale Village in Queens. It was meant to be an integrated housing cooperative, one of the biggest in the country. But they were protesting it because the labor that was used to construct it was all white. It was not in a segregated union, or not a segregated union, excuse me. It was not, it was only a white union. So they were protesting for that. You can see that they're linking arms, trying to block trucks from driving through the street. There were a lot of different examples of civil disobedience and peaceful protests throughout these films. I think that if you actually go back just for a second. Mm-hmm. No, forward again. Thank you. If you see, there's these two men who are screaming at the truck. The man's face between them, he was the head of the NAACP New York State chapter at the time. His name is William H. Booth. He ended up becoming a New York State judge and served on Mayor Lindsay's Human Rights Committee for 3 years. There are a lot of examples of, we have, like I said, there are films of very famous people, but there are a lot of examples of smaller heroes here in the civil rights movement that are remembered but don't really get a lot of press. So sorry, we can keep going. So in addition to protest against segregation and hiring practice, segregation hiring, there were also protests against segregation in schools. There were also counter protests against school busing. So this is a picture of the Parents and Taxpayers Association, and they explicitly were a pro-immigration group of parents, but they were very explicitly against school busing. Yeah. Like I said, it was very difficult to find a lot of background information about the program itself, but you can look up a group like Parents and Taxpayers. They were quoted a lot. A lot of arguments were used in Congress against the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. But again, they were a pro-immigration group. They were, in their mind, in their language, were pro-civil rights, but they felt that integrating schools would cause white families to leave the city and would lead to a degradation in the quality of the schools. I don't think that I saw any families of color amongst Parents and Taxpayers protesters. So another really common topic of protest was police brutality. Just like protests today, a lot of those protests involved naming specific officers who were involved in different shootings, naming commissioners or different members of the police department who protesters felt were at fault for the death or should be fired or terminated or suspended. Amongst the films about police brutality, there's a lot more Spanish language signs that were specifically aimed at the Puerto Rican community in New York at the time. And in addition to just protests against police brutality, there were a lot of civil rights protests that were aimed specifically at the Puerto Rican community to get Puerto Ricans to engage in ending segregation practices. So you can see, the Protestamos de Muerte de Rodriguez. Sorry for my accent, but you can see they're protesting against they're protesting about the death of a specific person. And they're demanding for public accountability. We can go to the next slide. Okay, that's it for me.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. So, yeah, okay, sorry. I'm looking forward to delving more deeply into everyone's presentation during our question and answer period. I always feel a little bad leaving someone after their amazing presentation, but hold tight, we're gonna get back to you. So next up, we have William Cesari joining us. William adapted his presentation at the 2019 Archives Week Symposium. William's article retraces community activism in the South Bronx that led to the creation of Hostos Community College within the CUNY system in 1968. The efforts of faculty, students, and community leaders to save the college from dissolution during New York City's financial crisis in the 70s. So William will now share with us his research and his article, which delves deeply into that story. Thank you for joining us, William.
Sure, you're welcome. Thank you for the introduction. I wanted to just familiarize everyone a little bit with Ostos Community College. It's one of the City University of New York community colleges. It's located on the Grand Concourse in the South Bronx, if you haven't heard of it. And as Emily mentioned, it was founded in 1968 and opened in 1970. However, the focus of my article is one struggle in 1975 through summer 1976 to keep the college open. There were three separate struggles, or la lucha in Spanish. La lucha means the struggle or the fight. So the title of my talk is La Lucha, the Struggle to Save Ostos in the South Bronx. So that's where that comes from. And if you're not familiar, the college is named after Eugenio Maria de Hostos, who was a 19th century Puerto Rican activist, lawyer, man of letters. He did all kinds of things, founding schools, championed the rights of women, all kinds of accomplishments. So the college came to be named for him. But what happened just a few years after it was founded was threatened with closure. Space was always a problem for the college. And as the city approached its fiscal crisis, the city of New York in 1975, Ostos was slated for closure to be merged with Bronx Community College. So that's where my article starts, this particular movement. And with everything you may know or are familiar with about the Bronx during the 1970s, it was a tumultuous time, to say the least, for the city of New York and the Bronx in particular. So keep that in mind as a backdrop to the story of Ostos in 1975. Two main people were involved from the college. Two professors started two separate groups. One was named Ramon Jimenez, and another one was named Gerald Meyer. They were both professors at the college. I'm going to read a little bit at several points from the article, but I began my spoken presentation a year ago by thanking everyone who'd ever signed a petition, because signing a petition is what started this movement for Ostos and ultimately saved it from closing in 1976. So this is the story of a South Bronx community that demanded its right to higher education and fought hard to save it. And the slides you're looking at are two of the demonstrations that were held to save Hostos. This one we're looking at now is one of the most notable and most requested slides from our collection. It's a demonstration on 149th Street near 3rd Avenue. There was a Chase Manhattan bank branch, and this was one of the first actions of the Community Coalition to Save Ostos. That was the group founded by Ramon Jimenez, who taught in the Behavioral and Social Science Department. So he and students led a more militant yet nonviolent protest at the bank, again on 149th Street. You can read some of the signs. While Ostos is falling down, Chase Manhattan is making pounds. Please keep Ostos open. Dominican and Puerto Rican student associations, etc. The previous slide was a demonstration that actually closed the Grand Concourse to traffic for a time. So by more militant, this was a group that worked outside the administration of the college. So different than the group I'm going to introduce in a moment. This is the college at 475 Grand Concourse. It was a renovated tire factory or a tire distribution warehouse. You can see, if you're familiar with this corner, it looks very different now. There was a gas station there. You can see where it says power test on the left of the screen. So this very much looks like a renovated warehouse that that the City University leased for 10 years. So Hostos was kind of an experiment. They leased a space and opened at this location. So really no campus, no buildings other than this leased property. And so this is where this story begins. There was no student center, no library, certainly no cafeteria. There was just rooms in this structure for classes. So early in the 1975 to 76 school year, rumors began to circulate that Hostos was on a list of institutions to be closed. So Ramona Menez's group, the Community College to Save Hostos Community Coalition, circulated a simple petition demanding that the college be kept open. And that was a simple act of resistance that started this movement. One of the other principal group, Jerry Meyer's group, was the Save Hostos Coalition, which worked within the administration. So it worked from inside the college with letter writing campaigns, other petitions, etc., working with the college administration. So it had a very different approach than the Community Coalition. So they were both working toward this goal of saving the college. The target, or rather the stated enemy of the Community Coalition, was the Emergency Financial Control Board. You may have heard of this group separate from Hostos. It was a group of financiers and Mayor Beam and other accounting and numbers folks. You can read the names there. You'll recognize several of them from Governor Kerry, Mayor Beam, etc. This group was put together to recommend changes. One of those was closing Hostos. And so one of the most famous marches put together was a march from Spanish Harlem or El Barrio to the headquarters of the Emergency Financial Control Board. And that was one of the last marches before a decision was reached on whether or not to close Hostos. This is the campus, if you're not familiar with it. Across the street, you can see there's a large post office building. This is the Grand Concourse the students are standing in. And directly in back of the students near the subway entrance is the 500 building, which I refer to in my article. So this is the corner across the street from the 425 building we were just looking at. So before I run out of time, let me finish this story. So a series of demonstrations that raised a lot of awareness and got the story of Hostos in the press. However, CUNY, the Board of Higher Education, and the Financial Control Board recommended that Hostos be closed and merged with Bronx Community College in University Heights. So that was the decision, but Hostos kept at it, had that major march on the control board, and appealed to the state legislature in Albany. They took over the college. One of the most important things, the college was taken over by members of the Community Coalition and others. And it was the longest takeover in the history, possibly the history of New York City, certainly the history of CUNY. Let me read a quick sentence. Despite all the activism, letter writing campaigns, and the eventual takeover, the vote was reached for closure. Groups went to Albany. And finally, in the spring and early summer, freshman Assemblyman Jose E. Serrano, who is currently a US Congressman from the Bronx, they all got together and the legislature passed the Landis Higher Education Act. It restored $3 million to the CUNY budget, which was the exact amount that was going to be saved by closing Ostos. So it did end with the saving of the college, thankfully. So that was a happy chapter. Unfortunately, there was still money that needed to be raised, and La Lucha continued, the struggle continued to raise money for renovation of campus buildings. So I'll stop there. I think I'm out of time, but all this is explained in greater detail in the article. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. This is really great. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, I guess before we open up the floor to questions, I'm wondering if Amy would like to pose a question to our panelists.
I'm actually, Emily, I know that you prepared a couple of questions beforehand, and I'm kind of formulating a response to things that were just presented. So if you don't mind leading off, I will tag on directly after you.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
It's true, I did prepare some questions, but I am also in the midst of trying to process, even though I've read the articles, everything that has been presented this evening in a concrete way. So forgive me if I'm not there yet.
Emily, Emily, can I help you out? Or
Well, I mean,
are we trying to ask questions? Or?
No, I'm okay. I appreciate the offer. I'm just giving a preface to my
Sure.
to my questions. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Just give me one moment. Okay.
I'm ready with a question if you want, because I was kind of ruminating on it, and I kind of think I have some language to put to it now. If you want to,
please go ahead.
So one of the things that I think comes up repeatedly in all of these articles, I mean, for one, it's just remarkable how many of the materials feel like they're a mirror image of the times that we live in whenever they've taken place earlier. And that the concerns that come up repeatedly seem to feel very relevant today. They're kind of evergreen, which was part of, why we brought all of them together. I think that it's interesting, and Lana's article speaks to this perhaps most directly, but also Toby's work, this idea of sort of proactively collecting communities or trying to recuperate what was lost through very intentional archiving practices and through outreach to the communities themselves. And I think that what's very interesting to me about that is that oftentimes the way that we think of archivists and the way that we work is that we're sort of the end point of history, that things come in and that we have this sort of neutral role of organizing information and then sharing it out with historians and scholars and communities. And I think that what is demonstrated in a lot of these articles is actually like a very proactive stance and one that feels quite urgent. And I wonder if you could talk, if any of the panelists would like to talk about how their thinking around their own practice may have evolved related to these issues to one that is more proactive and kind of speaks to that urgency.
Juana, did you want to speak?
Yeah, but I don't know if everybody can hear me. No, I think I am, yes, I agree with Amy that is surprising the relevance of these topics nowadays. Chris, no, it was William, shared this image, this kind of cartoon that says we want to see Black people live again. And that is so relevant to the events this summer and how the rest of the year has politically shaped around Black Lives Matter. And I was also very interested about the geography of the city, you know, because something that is very important for Los Herederos is that they are working in a place that is rapidly being gentrified, and gentrification erases this memory. And um, I was fascinated with the map out that Toby makes on how, I mean, this settled in Flatbush, but how it came from the Lower East Side to Williamsburg, etc. So I think that there are like all these hidden stories that have to do with how communities move to another place. The Bronx is also rapidly gentrified. So I totally agree. I think that I see this work as proactive, not only looking at a background and a baggage that migration brings with it, and migration is at the core of the foundation of cities like New York, but also how, because migration does not stop, is always an evolving force. And our job is not only to document what has happened, but also document what is happening. And I think it's one of the things that is very important of Los Herederos. Los Herederos defines themselves as as a community that is invested in digital technologies. However, what they had compiled is mostly magnetic media and very early forms of digital cards and similar. So I think it's also like this history of technology, because something that has been very important for them is also recording oral tradition and paying attention that this is like an anecdote, but it's not. At the end of the day, a lot of families that used to live in Queens, at least Latino families, that are very similar to the families, except that they, in many cases, they are not necessarily Puerto Rican and Dominican, but from other communities. They move here with their music and their LP collections. And part of gentrification is also for people to come and tell them, oh, you're moving, you need to have less objects, I'll buy your music collection really cheap. So there is kind of a predatory behavior also in erasing the memory of these cultures, that we really have the responsibility to work with communities. And that for me is the beauty of what Toby was describing of the sisterhood and some of the projects that you present, that we can enable people to get at least the basic skills to take care for the archives that they compile. So community archiving, teaching each other, sharing resources, the internet, these conversations become very important tools to help people gain stewardship of the memory that they have collected.
Well, you know what, it's interesting too, thinking about the resonance between the work that's being done by Los Herederos and what Toby was talking about, in that, you know, with the sisterhood, they were kind of tasked by the rabbis to be the keepers of cultural memory, of the traditions, to keep them alive in their community. And that happened in a way that didn't really produce records. It was live, it was in person, it was engaging, engaging people in person, and those things are now taking some intentionality to go back and document and to find what was created at the time. So having a more proactive stance allows us to sort of intervene at an earlier point than we perhaps would have done in the past. Toby, would you like to share anything more about how you're approaching documenting sisterhood because of the lack of archival resources at East Midwood? Oh, I think you're muted right now, Toby.
Hold it 1 second. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I realize another thing that I realized that since there's not much paper about sisterhood, but we do have the bound copies of our bulletins that have been published since 1935. So I've been reading those, and that's where I have found out there was always a report of what Sisterhood was doing, sometimes more, sometimes more detailed than other times. And so I'm reading those and writing, making notes and writing it up, because that's another way. I mean, if it's not in the folder in the archival boxes, it could be in the newsletters. And I think all organizations have newsletters, or they try to for a time. And these are very vital resources. I mean, they probably are not saved, but they should be saved, because that's where you'll find a lot of what went on. So I'm now reading these, and I didn't know about this 1946 famine, and there are a lot of other things that I know I'm going to find out about that will fill out the history of Sisterhood. I mean, we had a 20-year fight in East Midwood to allow women to have equal participation in our religious services. 20 years. I mean, now it's forgotten, but it went on and on and on. And so that's something I have to, it's very hard to find it, because the board minutes were very discreet. Sometimes they just very, very terse. You always have to, one person had said, well, you don't want to make your minutes too detailed, because if you ever get sued, there's evidence against you. So the men were often very, very careful about what went in the minutes. So there's a lot of detective work. I'm sure other archivists have learned this, to find out what really happened in the history. So, I mean, we have to be alert that there's minutes, you have to interpret them, there are newsletters, there's flyers, there are other ways, and then there's interviewing, piecing together what happened. So, I mean, I'm more experienced archivists than I probably know these things very well.
Another thing that I was thinking about related to Diane's exhibits of community-based jazz archives is that it really kind of flips the lens on things from what we're used to. We're used to receiving jazz as, being promoted by a record label or a biopic that's being celebrated. And so it has this sort of mythic quality to it. And what's been so interesting about the materials that Diane has been curating is that they really kind of tell the story from the roots up. And in particular, the photography from Ken the Photographer, which the beautiful Nina Simone picture that was on display earlier came from. Juana was talking about those technological transformations. You can kind of see the transformations in technology as he's picking up different cameras from the 1940s with an early analog camera, in the early part of the collection, through various different kinds of photography. And while that's happening, he's going out and engaging with the community and documenting it himself. And so it becomes like this timeline that just comes to life, but it's through his own sort of lens, which I really I found very attractive about that collection. That wasn't really a question though. So Emily, do you want to jump in with a question?
I don't know. I feel worried about my questions. I feel like they kind of overlap a little bit of what we've touched on. I'm having a hard time, I'm just having a hard time putting everything together. I guess all I can say is that each of the stories, what the theme that seems most present is the strength of community that's represented in them. And even with Diane's project, participating with her colleagues in a communal project to create this digital exhibit is part of the story as well. So I'm just thinking of all of these histories of people coming together up to the very present with Juana's story. And I'm just wondering, even though some of you have touched very directly on this in your presentations, and some have just alluded to it. I'm wondering if there is like a thread of inspiration that you feel you can really draw from the story of your research that could inform community building moving forward. As we all live in New York, and as Amy introduced the evening, we've witnessed so much devastation and just destruction, and maybe those are very, well, I guess they're applicable terms, and just like dissolution of so much of what we know of New York to be. And Juana's article, I feel like very keenly like captures the resurgence of like community strength in these trying times. So I guess if there's something that you found in your research that you feel can inform more efforts to build community, given the context of our present pandemic wrought situation, if you feel like sharing that. I don't know if that's too broad, or if you feel that maybe.
I have a question, like a question for your question, but
Okay.
for the people that contributed articles. I feel that the stories that we have documented, I mean, of course, I have only read mine, but they unveil also hidden histories or forgotten histories. Like, people have forgotten the very rich musical history of Queens. And I think that that's like a great value of Diane's work, because it's associated with some place, you know, like New York has suddenly become so Brooklyn-centric, and it's always been very Manhattan-centric, but it's also very much related to affluence of capital, you know, and fashions and trends of life. So I think that that's very important. So I'm thinking a little bit, I'm curious on how we see this proactivity that Emily is mentioning, and is this idea of forging more community around archives in the revival of DOT, and it also in the case of what Chris presented. I think it's so close to questions that we are asking right now on archiving sensitive topics. Now, I mean, it might be material from the past, but it also renews the question on how do we archive and give access to sensitive materials, which I think that there is that intersection between William's presentation and Chris, and of course, Los Herederos also face that, taking care of people. So I don't know if we can like elaborate on that, if that's an interesting thing to reflect.
Maybe I can speak towards that, just because I think everyone else's collection was created with the consent of the people who were documented, and my collection was created without that. And so there's a lot of really great images and films of just people, just incredible bravery, things that communities should feel extremely proud of, things that I think would be kind of the heroic stories that parents would pass down to their children or their grandchildren. And stories where people put their bodies and their lives on the line to just have a very basic sense of dignity and equal treatment before the law. But those stories, and those stories are recorded on films that if you didn't know the context, you might think that they were home movies, that these families who went out to protest and hold chains in front of trucks to stop them from going to construction sites that used all white labor. You might think, oh, well, this is a family that went out to do this. They thought that this was important, and so they took a camera to record it with them. But that's not what happened. It was recorded by people who thought that these events and these movements were potential security threats to the residents of the city of New York. So on one hand, it documents these really wonderful things that communities should feel a sense of ownership over and should embrace these moments where they did make the world better and they made their communities better. But on the other hand, there will be this context of the collection and of those films that is inescapable. It was created because the city feared them and feared the actions that they were taking. And aside from that, there's very little ability for us to identify people in these films, most of the people in these films. So we're sharing them. We don't actually have consent of the vast majority of the people who show up. We're hoping that they like this and that they want people to see the kinds of events that they lived through. But we're not doing it with a lot of, the only community that we had to consider was the community of the NYPD. We didn't have to consider the community of the NAACP or CORE, Youth Against War and Fascism, Students for Democratic Society, or any of the local organizations that were surveilled here. The only consideration that we had to make from a practical standpoint was the community of the NYPD. And I really hope that, I hope that by making those communities or the ancestors, not the ancestors, sorry, the children of those communities aware of these films, they can take them and turn them into and embrace them for the sort of strange home movies that they are.
Thank you.
Could I follow up on something Chris said? I think it speaks to Emily's question and Amy, your statement at the beginning. One, I hadn't thought about the Ostos story. While it's very important, I hadn't thought about it in the context of today's movements. So that's new for me, and it kind of gives a new resonance to it, a new frame for it. But as to our broader discussion, I don't think it's a stretch to say, certainly these stories were lesser known or marginalized or not elevated, maybe. Certainly a lot. Like when I hear about jazz in Queens, all I ever seem to hear about is the Louis Armstrong house. And that's great, but so to elevate these stories and keep them known and in the public eye is one way to, Emily's question was, how do we do this community archiving? And one way is keeping these stories known and elevating the characters in them. Sometimes we hear about the same people. So I think that's one way to do it. These lesser known groups becoming visible and getting out there. So that was just one thought I had that kind of touched on certainly I'd never heard of this Midwood, the Midwood group and these women who've done all this work, are they known? They were invisible. So kind of this cross between marginalized, invisible, or unknown, bringing those stories forward, I guess, is what I'm saying.
William, I was curious, thinking about your materials specifically, and the characters that come up in your presentation related to the two groups, the two professors. How did those materials end up in the CUNY archives?
Oh, it's interesting. Gerald Meyer, the professor who organized the Save Ostos Coalition, saved everything. So we have all these original flyers, photographs, and he worked at the college until 2002. So he had filing cabinets full of all of this stuff. So we were very lucky in that regard. Many other records of the college have been lost. So that became the basis of his collection, the Gerald Meyer collection, which documents all these movements.
Oh.
Yes, Toby.
Yes, I think we should take that as our motto: save everything. because otherwise it will be lost. And I think particularly now, we should be saving things about how people in our organizations have responded to the pandemic, things that are going on, and because it'll be forgotten. But I'm saving things as much as I can.
Actually, I wanted to follow up on that. There's actually a greater danger, I think, in not saving everything than just things being lost. Shortly after I finished digitizing my collection, The Gothamist wrote an article about it, and it was a perfectly good article. The comments on it mostly were about how great it was that the NYPD did this, that they didn't break any laws, that they didn't do anything wrong, and that anyone who's complaining about the NYPD's actions during the 60s and 70s is just whining. So if we don't save everything, someone else might, and they might claim it. They might claim collections in a very different way for very different purposes.
I mean, one of the things that was coming through in a lot of the articles for this issue was the importance of having autonomy over your own narrative. And that gets to those ideas of informed consent as well. But also, I think for a lot of these figures, if they were recognized at all, particularly those involved with social movements, it could be very sensationalized in a way that sort of distorts who they are or what they were doing. And I think that the documentation of the groundswell of people that turned out for Ostos to save it, the march that had thousands of people, really, I mean, today that would still be remarkable. And the number of direct actions that were nonviolent by all the groups that show up in the films, to me, really speaks to, it becomes like a counter narrative to some of the more sensationalized things that we've seen. And I think Juana's article also kind of speaks to those ideas around the way that immigrants have become politicized in our current political climate.
And kind of just to comment on this idea of collections becoming hidden, unhidden. I think something that I've been grappling with since starting my position here was, because we are a music archive.
Mm-hmm.
Music isn't like a physical object, right? So we have all of these films and audio recordings and born digital audio recordings that we need to save and preserve in the future. And just that medium itself is so at risk. So I think that's another sort of big thing now for that I'm kind of grappling with now, is how to make sure that this musical history doesn't get lost, especially with these shrinking resources now because of the pandemic,
Yeah.
Guys, I want to be mindful about time because we're getting close to 8:30. But I did want to kind of throw it out both to our attendees who are in the audience. There's a Q&A button there if you want to ask the panelists any last questions, or if the panelists themselves have anything that they wanted to touch on that we haven't covered yet. Not? Well, that's all right. Just take a minute to formulate a question.
Oh, what do we got here? I guess.
Thank you, Pamela. Thanks for the thank you. So to close out New York Archives Week and this event, I'd like to first thank all of our contributors, plus our publications committee who have put in hours volunteering to copy edit and help with uploading and editing. And it's been wonderful to work with everyone and a great way to get to know your work better. I'm dropping in the chat the link to the Metropolitan Archivist, which is now live on Medium. I encourage everyone to spend some time getting to read the articles in depth, There are also, in addition to the ones featured today, interviews with several people in our community and beyond, a book review, and as I said, Diane's digital exhibition, which will have a second part, which will be revealed in the coming days. So with that said, congratulations to everyone. Thank you so much for all of your efforts on this. And yeah, I look forward to sharing this out with our community even more in the coming days.
On a closing note, I just want to acknowledge all the tremendous amount of work that Amy has put into the creation and production and the reason you're getting that link to the issue right now is obviously because of the help from the publications committee, but largely driven by the tenacity of Amy. I don't know. It's mind-boggling how you managed to get everything done. It's inspiring and incredible. It's really, truly incredible. If this was left up to me, we wouldn't have publication for like until maybe the end of the year. I don't know. Anyway, so I just want to formally, and on behalf of, I'm sure, everyone involved in Archives Week and with Archivist Roundtable and Metropolitan Archivist, thank Amy for her unyielding dedication and drive and passion in creating this incredible professional organization, and all the fruits of her labor are on display at the link that she has delivered too. So thank you, Amy.
You're way too kind. I know, because I'm going to turn around and brag right back at you. That you know, we're just New York Archives Week is also a very special time for me to like feel love from the community and from our board, especially with each one of the events that we've done over the course of the past week. There have been moments where whoever was in charge got over their bandwidth for a moment, needed some extra support, and I can tell you that it is always there. It is just always there, and I love this community for that reason, and it's very, very special. So thank you so much, guys.
No, thank you so much for all the work and the interest in our archives and projects, and very nice to meet all the colleagues tonight, and thank you to everyone who joined us.
Yeah, it was nice meeting everyone, and I'm looking forward to reading everybody's articles.
Bye, everyone.
I am going to abandon you because I have another meeting, believe it or not.
I do believe it. And I know you're so busy. Thank you so much for taking the time.
No, thank you for everything. Bye-bye.
All right. Take
Thank
care.
you, Amy and Emily.
Oh,
Bye,
no.
guys.
Your help.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much, Toby. Thank you. Oh, what an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for everything. It was a great experience.
Oh, your presentation was so passionate. I can't thank you enough for that. It's so truly inspiring.
Thank you. Everyone was terrific. Everybody was very well spoken. Yeah, wonderful.
But thank you so much.
You all have a lot to feel proud of tonight.
Right.
Yeah, thank you, William, also.
Well, thank you for tolerating my last minute everything. So
no, are you kidding? I couldn't believe that you had to go back in to find the drives to send the files. We were just like going as fast as we could to try to get everything like ready.
I was mad. I was like, it's the day that I'm like, oh, I'm done with the article, and then I'll do the images without really realizing what was involved. And you know, I'm glad you got them, but yeah, it worked out. I live close to Ostos, so it's not a big deal, but getting into the building isn't as easy as it used to be. So
Well, it's also been like a big learning experience for me. I think probably for Emily as well, and for our publications committee. You know, kind of like learning the Medium platform, and I think getting a little bit of confidence as editors as well. Certainly, we wanted to make sure to not impose our own view or agenda too much on the works, but I think that we found a good middle ground for being able to give helpful feedback that didn't, stray from the author's intent. And that was something I'd never done before. So I approached it with a lot of nervousness.
Do you mean like editing, getting feedback, like copy editing, or just feedback on the article, or?
Yeah, the whole process has really been a learning experience, and it's funny because Chris, who was on earlier, and I had this whole extended thread today just about the title of his article, because we kept finding that depending on which still from the videos we juxtaposed it really changed the meaning. And with something as sensitive as surveillance films, you want to be very careful about what that ends up being.
Sure.
So we actually went through like several configurations of staging things and then looking at the proofs and going, no, this still feels like it's not really, it puts too much emphasis here, or it's too maybe inflammatory, or
Sure.
it was very interesting. And so those were really like valuable conversations that I really enjoyed, that don't, nobody who reads it is going to know that all that thought and work went into even something as small as like the title and the lead image.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been great. I've loved all of the interviews that we've done and all of the content. And the thing, I didn't mention this in our talk, and I probably should have. But the thing that's different about the Metropolitan Archivist now than in years past, it's been on Medium for a couple of years just as a blog role, but we never really leaned into the affordances of a digital platform. So we, with Diane's exhibit, there's a lot of audio recordings that are there, so you can hear oral histories or jazz recordings or what have you. And with one of our interviews, we have the video of the interview plus some other performance videos, because it's about La Mama. And so to me, it really seemed like this was like the first time that we really kind of tried to push the format into something that was new and really showed off archival materials to their best advantage, instead of being kind of forced into that two-dimensional flat PDF kind of
Oh, nice.
article. So it's been very exciting to work on all of it.
I'm looking forward to looking at it.
Yeah, me too.
Can somebody else click on the link and let me know that it looks okay? This is so tricky doing these webinars too, though, because once I start sharing slides, I actually can't do anything. I can't back out of anything to look at my computer or check my email or what have you. And so it's just like, you better have everything prepared before you get rolling, because there's no getting out of it. You're live.
Oh, that's funny.
And this is the third program in a week. Last Thursday we had the symposium, which was all day, so it was 9.5 hours of broadcasting straight. And it was exactly the amount of intensity that you would imagine.
Wow.
You needed a drink by the end of the day.
Oh, no kidding.
But it was fabulous too, and it was super energizing. And I think that what has been really striking to me is that Archivist Roundtable, I've been a member for, I guess, 5 or 6 years now. And, so much of what we do in our community has been really tied to in-person events. Like people, we have like an automatic audience that just shows up anytime that we do anything. oftentimes that's been very Manhattan centric. There's a lot of repositories in Manhattan, and so a lot of people work close by and are able to attend. And so we really have been trying to kind of escape that gravitational pull. And what has been really nice about shifting to virtual, even though it's more work, is that we're able to reach more people, and like vastly more people. So, you know, for our community hours, that has meant people from Long Island and from New Jersey and from Staten Island are able to join, but also people who have no archives community around them. So we had somebody who is in the desert in Arizona who's been tuning into the community hours. We've had people in Pennsylvania and upstate New York.
Oh, nice.
And then our symposium, I mean, we had people tuning in from Brazil, Algeria, the Netherlands, gosh, I can't remember. I mean, several continents. And then I think 28 states in Washington, D.C., in addition to New York. So
Oh, that's great.
it was just, it's just been really like challenging to work on, sure, but like exciting to feel like you're connecting in a way that you didn't really think was possible before. And part of that's because everybody's online now. So like that's where you find people. And that's where everything is happening.
That's true.
Well, I have to say, a lot of things are happening online, but there's, as we discussed earlier in the evening, physical communities are still thriving in the pandemic.
Yeah, this, I mean, I think as far as like gatherings is kind of what I was meaning. It's like when you're gathering,
That's true.
you have to gather online for the foreseeable future. I have a colleague in Paris who was like, you know, had to cancel our meeting today because of the lockdowns that are going into effect now. It seems like we'll be sheltering for a while.
No, it's true. It's true. I mean, and I think like I've also been hearing like that, you know, community, like in other forums, like community building online does resemble physical community building as we knew it. So anyway,
Emily,
I guess
I'm sorry if I put you on the spot, by the way.
Oh no, that's fine. I was like, I got this, and then I was like, no, I just don't, because I just was like, I had my questions, but I wanted to kind of gel everything in and respond to everything instead of going with my question. So I was like, I just felt weird about it, and then I was trying to fix it. If I could have, if you took another minute, I would have definitely jumped in. Thank you, William, for offering to help. I was just sort of like in a mental like block of like trying to, like I said, gel everything. So I was like,
I was just going to make some sort of summary statement. I wasn't going to start talking about my thing again, but I was trying to pull together some. Usually when you have one thing, sometimes it'll get somebody talking. So
yeah.
You're welcome, but it worked out fine. So.
That's the problem with these programs though, is like by the time you kind of like get rolling in the conversation, it's like people have to go.
True.
It's always the way.
All right. I think I'm gonna say good night. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks guys. It was great. And yeah, I mean, take a look at the digital copy and let me know how.
I will. Oh, I definitely will.
Yes. Can't wait. Can't wait.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
I think we still have attendees.
I am not sure. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Let's see here. I think.
Well, I know what happens if I remove them.
I just did remove them.
Oh, you did? Oh no. Yeah, that's fine. That's happened before at the end of a thing.
It's over.
The class.
They probably walked away from their computer. I always assume that people who are still there after the event is over just wandered away and haven't come back yet.
I think I owe you a couple apologies.
Why?
Sorry.
No,
Oh
why?
yeah. Just for everything, really. I feel like I really didn't. I feel like I didn't do enough with this, with posting everything and final edits.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. This is the thing. I knew from the get-go that I was asking a lot. I never, if I take you into battle with me, I know what I'm getting myself into. And I really, there were things that I just did not know, like Diane's exhibition was so much more complicated to pull together than I would have thought. Just transcribing interviews, I used to do that all the time, and I don't know if I've gotten old or what, but man, that was a killer. So it's just kind of one of these things where I felt like once we had already made contact with so many people and there was such good content, it was like, well, are you going to do this or are you not going to do it? Let's just, let's stick the landing, And so I was just like, all right, let's throw down. Let's get who we need in the room. We need Megan. We need Steph. And we're like, just get it done, And that's kind of that's the hustle that I am used to.
Okay. All right. So that was part of the original plan, was to pull them in.
I don't think I had. I was talking about that in my sort of closing, but man, with the symposium too, it was so much harder than in years past because we had to figure out all this technology and train ourselves, train the people who were helping us, and then train all the people who were participating. And it just was it was just a ton of work, I think that this year is I'm just having to learn and adapt and be there. So I was I was pulling people in at the last minute. Pamela Cruz, Jenny Swadash, are you available? I heard that you might have some free time. Can I recruit you to work on this thing? And they said yes. It was they were there, they showed up. And so I think that for me also, what I'm trying to kind of figure out is I think I need an earlier breaking point where I snap into that delegation mode, because I think that I assume that I can get to it. I know how to do that. I'll knock it out. And what I'm finding is just with everything being digital, even down to the link that goes to your inbox from Medium, it was just how can it be this hard to just get into the account in the first place?
Right.
Or get the images, or where it William, I think, originally sent the images to only one of the emails, and nobody who was actually working on it had access to it.
I didn't know that. I was confused. That's
huge.
the other thing. There are so many email chains with versions, so many versions of everything. I was just God, when you were send William's thing, then I saw the photos. I was the images, because honestly, I don't know what the most recent version of his article is to send you. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was so confusing.
Well, and I think the thing is too, I think now that we've kind of done it once, I think we can kind of come up with a process and actually make it easier for other people to participate.
Are you planning to collaborate on future issues?
I mean, if you would like my help, sure.
I mean, yeah.
Okay. I don't want to presume.
But I was thought you were gonna be okay, now you know how to do it, and then you're
Here's what I think.
I'm oh no, I missed out. I should have uploaded everything because now I don't know how to upload. And
have you looked at the link?
I looked at it. Yeah, it's good.
It looks good. It looks damn good. So here's the thing. I have a number of people who I think need to have extra support in their committees. And I think that, I know that we had kind of sent out a thing to folks before, but I think that I think having something tangible to show people and to have them get excited about is a lot better advertisement for the publications committee specifically. Like,
Okay, I see what you're saying.
and I don't know if you've noticed, but Anne is amazing at drumming up participation on like Instagram and things like that. She's good at getting stuff out. So I kind of want to do like a recruitment email for a few of our committees and see if we can get a few more members on them, just so that there's more support all the way around. And it was like I was saying to William, like I don't think I've collaborated, I've co-authored articles, but I've never been, no, that's not true. I have been an editor on things before, but it's been quite a while. And I had to like kind of figure out what was like my comfort zone of like, well, I really think this needs to change, but I also don't want to like erase the person's voice or, whatever. I was delighted whenever I sent Toby's edits to her and she came back to me with like, like wasn't just straight checkbox, but like took what I had said and made it her own.
Oh, good.
And that was like the ideal situation, right? And not everybody has the bandwidth to go back in and sort of sort through it again. So in the cases where they feel like, yeah, actually you hit it on the nose, that checkbox is really convenient for them.
Yeah.
So I feel like, I was like, this was an experiment. I don't think we should do as big of an issue again.
Yeah, and I think that hopefully we can set better deadlines so that everything isn't due at the same time, because that crunch was a little bit like overwhelming, and so I feel like I just kind of gave up, and so I don't know. I was like, we're just not going to publish it on Thursday. I think I even said that to like William. I was like, it's probably realistically not going to come out for a couple weeks. I didn't clear that by you, but I was like, this isn't happening. Like, it's just not. But you made it happen somehow. It's crazy. It's crazy. Great job.
Yeah. I mean, I was excited about it. Especially, like, I don't know, the Zakia interview, and like I had just gotten that text back from Ruth and Sandy, and I was just like, this stuff really, like, it's so I don't know, it's just so good. Like it's good to have people thoughtfully engaging these ideas. It feels really invested. And I just kind of want to show it off, like I want to get it out there, get it in people's hands, get people reading and talking about it, and kind of see what happens, like get it out in the world, and then just see where things kind of go from there.
I mean, I think that the professionalism of the whole Archives Week production has elevated, like at least my impression of Archivist Roundtable.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I feel like I don't know. I mean, but Archivist Roundtable is the people who are working on things, and we have. I mean, I think that was kind of the thing. The reason that I wanted to really do something different with the Metropolitan Archivist is because there's so much talent in our community, and they come from different places and have these different things that are important to them. And like you kind of saw that the way that things came in those first drafts, not everything was as polished. Like you had some people like Lana, who's gonna basically send you, like the finished thing. There was barely anything for me to edit in there. And some people who will like benefit from some editorial feedback, but whose ideas that undergird their writing are very strong and important to bring forward, and I think what I really want, and what I think, an archival community the size of New York's really deserves, is something that, shows off that brain trust that we have in our membership and the kind of skill that they bring to things. And having a really sophisticated digital presence is part of how we communicate that out to the world. It's sort of like, if we're gonna tackle challenging subjects, I want to make sure that we do so in a way that, comes off in a very strong way. That comes off as professional and really thoughtful and invested, but also like, just like savvy. And I think that there's a lot of that going on too, like, I mean, again, not to brag too much about Anne, but I can throw anything at her and she makes it look sexy on Instagram. And Stephanie too, though, like where, Steph was handling all of the satellite programs that happened and did all the branding on that and set up all the event pages on that. If I had to do that, I would have lost my mind. And so, it's just like, we've got really talented people who really care, who show up. And, I think that hopefully it's sort of, I don't know, I want archivists to be coming from a place of strength. I feel like for too long, archivists themselves as like sort of, knowledge care workers are not given their due. And, if there's a way that I can sort of push back on that, then that's what I want to do.
Amazing.
But I
You
have
gotta
to tell you, I am so tired.
yeah. I have to eat something. I'm like,
I'm so tired right now. I had to hold on to my chair at one point because I was like shaking.
oh no. Oh God.
It's not visible to anybody. It's partly just because I haven't had dinner either, and I get like blood sugar moments.
Oh no. You gotta go.
But I feel great. Congratulations. And I think take a minute to bask in having accomplished something really great, and then
Participated in accomplishing something great.
Whatever, your name is on this too. But I would love to regroup in maybe, I don't know, a couple of weeks time or something. Let's have some downtime, and and you can get through your midterms and we can kind of like wrap up all the loose ends with New York Archives Week. And then let's think about where you want to take it next.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And with that, I'm going to sign off.
Auf
Emily,
Wiedersehen. Trying to say German.
Oh, now I have to figure out how to sign off. I have to stop sharing first.
I think I can just leave it, I think.
Later.
See ya.